Welcome to DNA Clarity and Support. I'm your host, Brianne. Listen as I chat with authors and leaders in the DNA world about the family and personal impacts of DNA testing. You'll hear news stories, unique perspectives, find out about books, websites, organizations, other podcasts for those involved in the world of DNA. Please be sensitive to younger listeners as the conversations can get intense at times. This is a production of Watershed DNA. Learn more at watersheddna.com. Welcome to today's episode of DNA Clarity and Support. I'm super excited to have Diahan Southard with me today. Hi, Diahan.
Hi, Brianne. Thanks for having me.
You are the founder of Your DNA Guide, which is a website and an educational program and a book. So this is completely relevant for the listeners of my podcast. And I was wondering if you could give me and the listeners a short synopsis of your background. How did you come to be doing the work that you do? And what is the work that you do through Your DNA Guide?
Yeah, thank you. So at Your DNA Guide, we really try to provide educational experience for individuals who want to learn more about themselves or about their family using DNA and genealogy. So we're really all about the education side. We don't provide the actual physical test, but if you've taken a test from any major DNA testing company, we can help you learn how to use it to find out whatever it is you want to know. So I got into this business. When people ask me, I always say it's just divine intervention. Like, this was not my plan at all. I was not a kid with a lemonade stand. I never wanted to be an entrepreneur. It sounded scary. And I was more into just, give me a job. I'll do it well. You can pay me and I'll go home. Like, that was my MO. But it really has just been a series of small and simple steps that's led me to be the owner of a business now. It's funny to try to trace your life back. Like, how exactly did I end up here? It really comes back to my high school English teacher. We, as graduating seniors, he gave us this piece of advice that has changed my life. And I tell it to all the graduating seniors I know. As soon as you get to college, find a professor who's researching something you're interested in and get involved. Like, hands down, this is the best way to A, decide if this is really what you want to do, and B, get some stuff on your resume before you even graduate from college, right? So I did that. I showed up to college and I was interested in genetics and biology. And so I went to the microbiology department at Brigham Young University and I asked the secretary for a list of what all the professors were researching. And she had one. She pulls it out. I looked down the list and it's like virology and bacteria. And I was like, that's boring. And then I saw archaeogenetics. Dr. Scott Woodward was researching the DNA of ancient Egyptian mummies. And I was like, there's nothing cooler than that. Let's do that. So
Isn't that amazing? They can still extract DNA from an ancient Egyptian mummy. Pretty awesome.
Right? Amazing. So I walked down the hall and knocked on his door and said, hey, could you use another researcher? And of course, they're always looking for lab rats. And so I just started working on this project. And the project really was fascinating in its own right. There's an ancient cemetery about 60 miles outside of Cairo, Egypt, that was unmarked. It wasn't near any towns and nobody knew who these people were. And so there was this multi-discipline project to try to figure out who these people were. And we were the little tiny genetics part of this project. At that time, of course, we were only doing mitochondrial, that direct maternal line DNA, and Y DNA, which is the direct paternal line DNA. But it was mostly just mitochondrial DNA. And the problem was we could get DNA from the mummies, but we couldn't tell who they were. There was no database, right? This was back in like 1999, 2000. And so this idea formed. Scott Woodward had this idea that, man, if we had a database, like if we had mitochondrial DNA from people all over the world, we would be able to tell who these people were. And that really was the seed that started the genetic genealogy industry. So this project called...
This world hasn't really been around except for really the past 20 years. So relatively, It's young science.
It's very young. And that's exciting too, right? Because it means we've got lots of places to go. Yeah. So back then we just did mitochondrial DNA, a little bit of Y-DNA, and we started to build a database. And that database became the Sorensen Molecular Genealogy Foundation. And that foundation was eventually sold to Ancestry DNA and became the foundation of their database. And so at that point of sale, I was a young mother and working part-time from home. And I wasn't really in a position or didn't want to take a full-time position. And through another series of events, ended up just starting Your DNA Guide.
That's awesome. So it all started with mummies, and now here we are with enormously sized databases where we can track down living family members.
Yeah, it's really incredible. Mm-hmm.
So right off at the start of your book, you give readers a plan for approaching DNA testing. And really the idea is to help people who are new in the process or maybe have just gotten started figure out where to go and how to use DNA testing as part of their genealogy search. So you start with these like 5 steps or 5 keys to get started. And I thought that was such a brilliant way to approach what's seems like really overwhelming, daunting DNA testing. And you really broke it down into 5 steps. And I was wondering if you could walk us through them and explain like why each of them is important. So like your first one is make sure you're asking a good DNA question. So what does that mean?
I feel like one of the great things about the current buzz about DNA is that lots of people have heard of it. And that makes it exciting because it means our databases are growing, which means we're easily or more easily able to find what we're looking for. But kind of the side product of that is everybody feels like DNA has all the answers, right? DNA can do anything. It's limitless. It's going to solve all of our questions and problems. And that's not true either, right? So one of the first things that I really want to make sure people understand is what can DNA do for you? What is a good DNA question to ask? And it really involves asking a question that autosomal DNA, the kind that my book deals with, the kind you get from both sides of your family, what can that really tell you? And what can you learn? And there is a limit. So I'd like to tell people, if you are looking for a 3 times great grandparent or closer, your DNA test can probably help you. Now, that's a lot of people. We have a lot of ancestors who are our 3 times great grandparents or closer. So there are a lot of possibilities. But some people, some very diligent researchers already know all those people. And so I just wanted to be clear that what I'm going to teach you in the book is how to find someone in that range and not beyond.
So it works for people that are looking for a close relative, say like a parent or a sibling, but it also works for more distant relationships like cousins and second cousins and like that.
For sure. Right. Exactly. Mm-hmm. But it won't work for like your 5th cousin or 7th cousin, or at least it's not going to work as well.
Okay. And then your next point was to make sure you test the right person. Is it not always yourself as the first person to test? Could there be somebody else in the family that might help you get your answer faster if you test somebody else?
Yeah, so good question. So the reason I put that in there is because it seems natural for us to just test ourselves. I mean, that seems like the logical first step. But the answer really is you want to test the oldest person available, the oldest generation available on the line you want to research. So if you want to find your parent, well, then yes, you're the person who needs to be tested. There isn't anyone else. But if you're looking for your 2 times great grandfather on your dad's side, and your dad is still alive and willing to be tested, you should absolutely test him, right? He has 100% of his DNA. You only have half of it. So testing the older generation is always the best move. So in very general terms, I tell people, anybody who does not have both of their parents available to test needs to test themselves. But for people like me, I've tested both of my parents. So I am, in research purposes, genetically irrelevant. Like, I have nothing to add. So I never look at my own DNA test results when I'm doing research. Now, there's value for me to be tested for myself for lots of other reasons. But if I'm doing research, if I want to find an ancestor, I always look at my parents' DNA.
That's a good point. Yeah, I did testing on myself. And one of the main reasons was I wanted to understand how it all worked and wanted to get familiar with how all of the different companies present their data. So part of it was I wasn't necessarily trying to get new information out of my own DNA test, but really just understand how it all fits together and how the online websites work. So sometimes it does help to test yourself, even if you're asking a different research question. The more you know, the more you learn.
That's right. Exactly. Yeah, there are lots of reasons to test yourself. And I think the number one reason is, like you said, to just understand it for yourself, to understand what it can tell you personally, and to get that little insight into your own genetics and your own history. I think it's fascinating for everybody to do it.
Now, I've only done the autosomal testing on myself and people in my family, but I know that there are other kinds of DNA tests, like mitochondrial DNA testing and Y-DNA testing, which you mentioned a little bit earlier on. So another one of your key points is make sure you take the right kind of test. Could you lay out the differences between the different types of DNA tests and what you mean by take the right kind of one?
Yeah, so we talked, like you said, about autosomal, which is by far the most popular test because that does trace both sides of your family. But as I mentioned, it has these limitations. It can't go back farther than your 3 times great grandparents if that's your goal. But there is some value in combining these test types. So mitochondrial DNA traces only your direct maternal line. So you have the same mitochondrial DNA as your mother and her mother and her mother and her mother on back. And you and your siblings all have the same mitochondrial DNA. So mitochondrial DNA can help us identify and trace that one specific line in our heritage. On the flip side, we've got Y DNA. So that's your Y chromosome. So only men have a Y chromosome. So only men can be tested on the Y chromosome. But the Y chromosome is following the same path as your surname for most Western cultures, right? If you're from somewhere that has that matrilineal surname, well, then this doesn't apply. But for most people, when you take a Y DNA test, it's possible to actually identify your surname. So this is very valuable for adoptees who are male and looking for their father, because taking that Y DNA test can sometimes just hand you an actual surname and say, here it is. This is the surname of your father. And that is so powerful, right? So for adoptees, it's absolutely, I think, essential for men who are looking for their fathers to take a Y DNA test. But it has such broad application, really, in any research goal that you have where you're looking for a man. You need to find that man's direct male descendant and test the Y DNA, because there's a lot you can learn about a person from that Y DNA test.
And not every company offers all of the same kind of testing. So your book walks people through, if you need a Y DNA test, this is the company to go to, or here's the places to look at for testing.
Right. Yeah. So we also actually have a page on our website, and we'll link to that in the show notes for you, that kind of lays out each company and what they offer. And so you've got it all on paper. But essentially, the Y-DNA and mitochondrial DNA test, the full version that you would want to use for matching and finding people, is only available at Family Tree DNA.
And so that kind of ties into your fourth point, which is that you have to choose the right testing company. And so for someone that needs to test the Y chromosome, they should choose Family Tree DNA.
Absolutely.
But we now know, what are the main companies that you tend to recommend and mention in your book?
So there are 5 major, what I consider genetic genealogy testing companies. So there's a lot of companies offering to tell you things about your heritage and tell you things about your health or about what foods you should eat based on your genetics. And all I'm talking about is the companies that want to help you find your family. That's like one of their main goals. Now, they may have other kind of separate goals, but that's like their main focus of their business, is to help you connect with family and make these connections. And so that is 23andMe, Ancestry DNA, MyHeritage DNA, Family Tree DNA, and Living DNA. Those are the 5 companies that I trust and I know personally, so I can tell you that their product is good. Now, for each of these companies, they have their own terms and conditions. So it's really important that you understand what their goals are as a company, what they're doing with your data. All of those things you need to be aware of because each company is doing things differently. So when I say I recommend these 5 companies, it's because I trust their product and their scientific process. But their terms and conditions are different, and you need to make sure you're understanding what those are before you test.
That's a really great point. And they can change over time is something that I always try to point out as well. So it's something that if you stay up to date in the world of genetic genealogy, you tend to find out about changes that are happening at the companies. But for those that maybe don't pay attention to the current news, something to be aware of is the terms might change over time. So try to be aware of that when you're picking which company to test with.
Definitely. That's an excellent point. Thank you for bringing that up. They definitely can change.
And your 5th point, which I think is a really succinct but a little bit more complex point, which is make sure you perform the appropriate kind of analysis. So break that down for us. What's that mean for you?
Well, number one, what that means for me is to not jump to conclusions based on some data that you see, especially in this very sensitive arena of finding close biological relatives, your parents, your grandparents, your siblings, your children. I've just seen too many people misinterpret what they see. And in such sensitive situations, there's so much to gain by just taking it slow and by being methodical and double checking and talking to experts and just making sure that you have come to the right conclusions. And the root of the problem really is in DNA analysis is that we base all of the information we get on this amount of shared DNA that you have with someone else. So we measure that amount in something we call a centimorgan. So it's just like a unit of measure for DNA. It's how we talk about how closely related people are. The problem is when you get that number, the number will never equal one relationship. Like never.
Right. So another way to say that is like you could share the same amount of DNA with a half sibling that you do with first cousin. So don't jump to conclusions too quickly if you're matching somebody that you don't recognize and are trying to figure out how they're related to you. You have to be slow, methodical, and make sure that you use all of the data available to you before jumping to a conclusion about a relationship.
Exactly. And it's just so easy to just get excited because you've made a discovery and start telling people and start, running down this path and only to realize, a few steps down the road, oh, wait a second. Just kidding. I made a mistake. And then a lot of times the damage is already done and you have hurt people and burned some bridges that will be difficult to repair.
Yeah. So in some of the work that I've done, I've seen the wrong brother named as a father. And, down the line, more DNA testing on different relatives reveals who the actual father is. But all along, there have been, hurt feelings and relationships that start off on one path. And then, something comes back later to show that the relationship is different than what they thought. And then how do you backtrack and kind of restart fresh? That can be really hard. Have you seen that happen as well in other situations besides, the wrong brother being named as a father?
Yes. I mean, I've seen it in lots of situations, but I think most often, as you've suggested, where you are related to that family, but have you identified the right person in that family as your relative? And it's hard to do. It's not easy. And it does take more research and it does usually take more testing. So it's just so important that we are careful and methodical.
Completely agreeing with you there. So you have both courses and a book and a website. Could you explain how they work together and complement each other and where someone should start if they're new?
Yeah, so we've tried really hard to provide education for every level of learning and for every budget of learning. So I am a huge DIYer. Like, if I can find a YouTube video and fix something myself or make something myself, I am 100% going to do it instead of hiring someone else to do it for me. Like, I love how the internet makes me feel empowered to try new things and do things that I never thought I could do before. And I'm amazed at the results that I get. And so I applaud anyone who wants to just watch my YouTube videos, read my blog, and can figure out what they need to know about their family history and their DNA. And I love that that's available to us to learn for free how to do things that we want to learn how to do. But sometimes, or I would say most of the time, when people are using my resources in that way, they may actually have learned and found the answer, but what you lack is the confidence that you did find the answer. And so that's where our next kind of level of information can help you. So certainly the book provides a guided experience through the DNA test that you have. So it's not a book that you read cover to cover. It's a book that you jump around in. It's a book that says, what kind of information do you want? And I send you to that information first. And then I ask you to go and do something with your DNA test results. Go look at this, go click on this button, go find this, and then come back. And when you come back, I then ask you, okay, from my experience, you're going to have one of two situations right now. Tell me what you have, and I'll send you to the right place in the book. So it's
a bit
guided.
like a choose your own adventure.
Exactly.
Experience.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
exactly. Right. And so the problem with the internet and YouTube channels and the blog and everything is that, yeah, there's a ton of really great information, but how do you navigate through it? And what stuff do you actually need versus just what's nice to know? Right. So the book is like a curated guide just for you and your journey through the things that you need. Okay. So then, even then though, I know that while you're on that journey, there may be questions that come up that don't fit the mold. Or like I said, most often it's that you have done it right. You just don't know that you've done it right. And so we will offer mentoring services. So time for you and I to sit down together and we can go through your specific question and I can lead you down this path. So after doing the book and mentoring for several years, basically what I realized is that even if I meet with you one-on-one and I do it even 3 or 4 times, even then there were pieces that were still kind of missing from your learning. And so I created the courses to take you from point A all the way to point Z with my hand right there next to you. So like our DNA skills workshop, for example, can help anybody find any ancestor back to their 3 times great grandparent, from their biological parent to their 3 times great grandparent. The course can help you. But it's 6 weeks. It's like intense. The training is focused and I'm right there the whole time, right? So I'm there to answer your question as soon as you have it. And I'm right there guiding you all the way through the journey. So it's really intense and hands-on. In fact, so we're in the middle of a DNA skills workshop right now. And this is week 4-ish, 4 of 6. And so this is the week where a lot of people start making some significant discoveries. And we've had 3 students over the last 2 days post on our discussion board the discoveries that they found. And it's so exciting. It's like, they did it, right? Because I know and I trust and I'm confident in this process. And as long as you understand the process and you take it, like we're saying, methodical, step by step, and you know what to do. And then as soon as you get stuck, I'm right there to be like, hey, this is it. Go this way instead, or turn right here. And to double check and to ask if they have questions. And what I like about the workshop too is that there's like homework and classwork, because you can sit in a classroom and feel like, oh, I understood that. And then you go back and try to apply it to your own research and you're like, oh, no, did not actually get that, right? And so the homework is great because it has an answer, right? You don't know the answer you're looking for, so you don't know if you've got it right. Where the homework teaches you the principles and then it lets you have that moment of, I did that right. I do understand this. And now I can see how to apply it to my own research. So
it's like a guided course. It's an online course, but it's guided and kind of self-paced a little bit.
Right. Yeah. So there's recorded recorded videos that you can watch, and it is paced, but all the videos are available if you want to breeze through it, right? Do it all in a week. I mean, you'd have to like work really hard, but you could do it. But yeah, I love this format that I've created because I do feel like it builds confidence and it builds the right methodology so that you know what you have done, so you know what to do next based on the methodology. So yeah. So, and then we have a YDNA course as well, which is a little bit less intense because the testing is less intense, but it's just a 3-week self-paced course as well that we open periodically so that you can learn, like really dive in and learn how to do YDNA. And we're building our courses all the time. Our next course to launch will be endogamy for people whose families have that cousin marrying cousins over and over and over again. And that can be really hard to untangle with your DNA. So yeah, it's exciting. I love this format. I love the combination of the online learning and the live component that you can like mix it, so that you can learn at your own pace and you can go back and rewatch the videos, which is key, right? You've got to watch them lots of times, but then there's that live where you feel like you're in a class too.
Yeah, so I get questions from people that were not genealogists before they did DNA testing or before the DNA discovery was made in their family. And all of a sudden they're pulled into the situation of trying to pull apart and understand DNA results. And so even kind of going back to some of the basics, like a little bit ago, you mentioned a 3 times great grandparent. And this is where I see people get confused sometimes. So they'll ask, like, what is 2 times great grandparent versus 3 times great grandparent? And what's the difference between a first cousin versus a cousin who is once removed or half, or a second cousin? So do you have a quick primer that you can share with listeners about understanding generation levels, like 2 times versus 3 times, and then cousin relationships, like a first cousin versus a second cousin?
Yeah, it's dizzying, isn't it? And when you've been in the industry, you don't realize that there's all this new terminology. I actually did a presentation for a library group this week, and I love doing those because it does remind me, most people that come to library presentations aren't genealogists. They are just interested in DNA testing. And so I get lots of questions like this that remind me that this is new and this terminology is something that has to be learned. And we do need to understand it in order to understand what our DNA is telling us, for sure. So I think the removed is always the hardest thing for people to understand. And so what I like to do is put it in context and ask you, okay, who is your first cousin? Think of your first cousin. Do you have them in your mind? And most people do know at least one first cousin. They say, okay, yeah, I got my first cousin, Rob. Okay, so Rob's your first cousin. So does Rob have children? And they're like, oh yeah, Rob's got 2 kids, Mary and Jack. I'm like, okay, Mary and Jack are your first cousins once removed because they are not on the same generation.
So the generation line, if you think of the family tree kind of spread out and all of the first cousins are on the same level of the tree, and then below them are their children, and then above them are their parents who are brothers and sisters to each other. So that removed is essentially 2 people who would be on separate lines of the family.
Different generations, exactly.
Lines.
So in my course, one of the first things I have you do when you're looking at a DNA match is what I call check birthdays. So it doesn't always work because there are families that are, your oldest of 10 and their youngest of 10, and generations can get off. So people that are your age can actually be a generation younger or older than you, like this happens. But in general, you can start with this principle of checking birthdays. And so if you're online at a DNA testing company, sometimes people will post their family tree, and you can look at their family tree and you can see, oh, well, their parents were born in 1947, 1949. Yeah, that's about when my parents were born. So they're about my age. And that would make us not removed, right? Even is what I call it. As opposed to someone you see that their parents were born in 1910 or 1920. Like, oh, well, that's when my grandparents were born. So these people are probably my parents' age, which makes me once removed from them. So it's just like a quick way to try to guess at removed or not, because it does make a big difference in how we think about our relationship to our DNA matches. Now, if there's no pedigree chart, there's no family tree posted, then how do you do it? Well, you could kind of guess a little bit. Sometimes people will post their picture. And yes, probably people tend to post pictures of themselves when they're younger rather when they're older. But still, I mean, you can kind of get a feel. I was looking at a match the other day with a woman who just turned 87. And we're looking at this picture of this girl, and there's no family tree, and she looks like she's 22. I mean, it's a full-on selfie with a, kind of a duck face, like this girl's young. And so I'm looking at my friend, her name's Edna, and I was like, Edna, this girl's like twice removed from you. This girl's the age of your grandchildren. And that makes a really big difference in how we look at their relationship. So.
And while we're on the subject of cousins, what is a half cousin? What does that half mean?
Right. So actually in my book, I made a whole table of these relationships because I know they can be so confusing. If somebody's your half second cousin once removed, what is your relationship? Who's your common ancestor? Like I just made a table because it's so hard to figure out. But essentially, if you think again about your first cousin, Rob, okay, why is Rob your first cousin? He's your first cousin because you share grandparents. That's how it works. First cousins share grandparents. So what's a second cousin? Well, then a second cousin shares a generation above your grandparents, which is your great grandparents. So then a third cousin shares your 2 times great grandparents, and your fourth cousin shares your 3 times great grandparents. And we can just keep going back. All right. So back to Rob. So Rob is your first cousin. You guys share grandparents. One thing I really stress in genetic relationships is that every time, as far as we know in humankind, it takes 2 people to have a baby, which means when we're talking about a shared relationship with someone else like Rob, we're talking about a shared couple, right? Our grandparents are a couple. All right. So if Rob and I are first cousins because we share this grandparent couple, then Rob and I are half first cousins if we're only sharing one of the couple. Let's say Grandpa was married twice, and I'm a descendant of Grandpa's first marriage, and Rob's a descendant of Grandpa's second marriage. So the shared ancestor that Rob and I have is just Grandpa, just one of the couple, and that makes us half.
I love that you bring it back to Rob and you. I don't know if Rob's an actual person, but I like the whole concept of think of somebody in your mind that is in your family and then learn about these terms with that relationship you already know about in your mind. I think that's a great
this is
approach.
Such a good principle. So many times in these mentoring sessions that I have with clients, we get online and they share their screen so I can see their DNA test results, and they pull up their match page and then they just start scrolling down. Oh, I know who that is. I know who that is. I'm like, whoa, wait. Investigating the people that you know and understanding what you see in their account is the best way for you to learn how to understand these unknown people. Don't scroll past your cousins that you know. Take a good hard look at them. Look at the amount of DNA that you share. Look how it shows up. Look at what's displayed. So you recognize all these things about Rob. So then later, when you're looking at a match you don't know your relationship to, you understand what you're looking at. So hands down, the number one thing you should do is spend a lot of time looking at your known relatives.
That's a great point. So if someone is getting started on a DNA search and getting started with genealogy in general, what would be the top 3 tips that you would have for a beginner?
My number one tip is always be sure you want to know. Because I think a lot of times we start off on this journey because we got this DNA kit as a present from someone else, or we hear it's kind of fun, or we're just a little bit curious about whether or not we really have Italian DNA. And we think we'll just do this for fun. And it is fun. And there's no reason not to do it for fun. But once you've tested, you can't untest. Once you see your DNA match list and you see who is or isn't there, you can't unknow those things. And DNA testing is very powerful, and it's very good at telling us who is and who is not related to us. And so, number one, please be sure you really want to know. Understand that you're going to find out information about your family relationships, and you need to be sure you want to know.
Many people don't expect a surprise or an unexpected relative, or that they're not connected to family the way they've always thought, until they get started with the DNA testing. And if that does happen to anyone who's a listener, or to anyone that's family or friends of a listener, we now have a lot of support for those people, the people who get an unexpected discovery. And that's where a lot of my work comes in, through Watershed DNA. So I see that's where our work complements each other a lot, Diane, is that you help people who really are ready and are interested in wanting to do the testing and the searching. And for those few people that end up, finding a surprise, that's kind of where my work comes in. So I'm really glad to see that you're making it so much easier for people to understand what the testing is, and that give that tip that, really make sure that you want to know, because you can't unknow what you find out from testing and doing the searching.
I just want to also put in a plug for Watershed DNA. It is, again, if any of you out there are struggling with a discovery, you are not alone, and you have support. And it's so important that you recognize that and that you reach out and get some help, because it is a very jarring experience to recognize or realize something about your family relationships. And it's okay to feel off-put and off-centered. And you definitely have resources to help you. So I'm glad to be complementing each other. Brianne, it's so good that the work you guys are doing. Okay, second tip is that this is going to take some time. So it's going to take learning. There's a learning curve, as we've already talked about, even the terminology we're using about what kinds of cousins there are and these centimorgans and all of that. It will take time, and you need to just be patient. Like any other new hobby, there will be a learning curve, and you'll have to be patient with yourself, and you'll have to spend some time doing some reading or just some exploring in the website. Don't expect it to come right away. And please don't get frustrated when it doesn't. It breaks my heart. The one experience that sticks out to me, I was at a genealogy conference one time, and I have a booth, like in the exhibit hall. And so usually during class time, the exhibit hall is pretty empty. People are in class. So I was kind of tidying up my booth from the rush of people during the in-between class time. And class was in session. There weren't very many people. And I see this lady kind of dejectedly walking down the aisles, just glancing up at the different booths. And she sees my booth. It's obviously about DNA. And she just gives a big sigh. And she goes, "Oh, DNA. I just walked out of one of those classes. I just will never understand it." And it just breaks my heart, because you can do this. You can understand this. You just have to keep going. Don't give up. Don't think you're not smart enough or that science isn't your thing. Anyone can learn this. I'm totally convinced of that. So don't give up on yourself. That's my second.
And the frustration happens for everybody. I think what's different is like, what are you going to do with that frustration? Frustration can be a sign that you need to just take a break, like step back, put it aside for a while, whether that's a couple of weeks or months. I know some people have set it aside for years and then they pick it up years later. Yeah, what are you going to do with that frustration when it hits? Because I remember when it happened, it happens to me still sometimes, but especially when I was first learning how to do genetic genealogy, I understood the DNA part of it, but the whole genealogy part was new for me. And I can remember those feelings of frustration and feeling like I was never going to figure it out. And I was never going to be able to pull the pieces of the puzzle apart and put them back together again. But I stuck with it. The frustration is so common. And I think it's great that you address that as a point.
Yeah, thank you. So the third point is related to the second, in that I feel like a lot of times we need to remind ourselves of the why. Don't lose sight of your why. Why are you doing this? Why is it important? And I have seen so much good come of family history research on every level. I've seen so much connection between family members. I've seen so much healing. I've seen so much good come out of this, that when it gets hard and when it gets complicated and when your family relationships seem to crumble or seem to struggle with new information that you may be finding, just know that somehow through all of this, it will tie you stronger and better together eventually. That even if it starts to divide you right now, there is some intangible power that our biological connections have. It is a real thing that there is a biological strand that connects people, and that power has influence. And over time, I think it will bring us together. And I love watching that happen among families. I love this idea that our DNA is tied to so many people. So many people. I mean, don't lose the magic of looking at your match list and recognizing that all of you have biological connection to each other, which comes from a real person. Your 2 times great grandmother is a real person, and she lived a real life, and she had real struggles, and she made it to some degree or another because you're alive. And I just love thinking about that we are such a big human family and connected in this really powerful way. And I think the more I look at DNA matches, the more I see it and the more excited it is to think, man, we're all connected to each other. And don't lose the magic of that as you get involved in your little search and your family. But this is connecting all of us.
So what I hear you saying through that is essentially the truth that comes out from doing this research into family history sometimes upsets our understanding of our family history in a way that's hard to adjust to. But in the end, that truth has a power of its own.
Yes.
So if someone is interested in getting a copy of your DNA guide, where would you send them? Where would you recommend they go?
For anyone wanting a copy of our book, you can get it on our website at yourdnaguide.com. And we're actually offering a 20% off code to any listeners of the podcast today. You can use the code WatershedDNA, and we'll put that in the show notes as well. And that'll give you 20% off the physical copy of the book. We also have the ebook version if you prefer to read it digitally. If you're international or from other countries other than the United States, you can get it on Amazon as well.
And I read my copy on my Kindle. So it's available in multiple formats. There's the paperback copy and the Kindle copy. Is there any other format that people would be able to get?
So you can get it from, like, Walmart has its own e-reader version. So it's on there. Basically anywhere you can buy a digital version of the book, you can buy this book. Our website download is just a PDF, actually. So you can open it in any PDF reader as well. So just lots of ways to read it if you're interested.
Excellent. Well, Diane, I have enjoyed our conversation today, and I think there was so much wisdom that came out of just hearing you talk about the different ways of understanding relationships, the ways to go about testing, picking companies, knowing about different types of DNA testing. So thank you so much for sharing your expertise with us today.
It's been such a pleasure, Brianne. Thank you so much for having me.
Thanks for listening to today's episode of DNA Clarity and Support podcast. Head on over to watersheddDNA.com to learn more about the resources and support available for those involved in DNA discoveries.